I'm Jack Carr, and this is the story behind my stories.
You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
JT Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Thor,
Corey Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mom,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
Jack Carr.
Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in to Author Stories. I hope you are enjoying the shows as much as I'm enjoying bringing them to you. You know, as always, you can go over to hankgarner.com and click over in the right-hand sidebar and subscribe to the show. You'll never miss an episode. It costs you nothing, and it helps other people find the show. The more people subscribe, the higher we go in the rankings on iTunes and Google Play and Stitcher Radio and YouTube and everywhere we are. And thank you for doing that. I appreciate it. I'd like to thank some sponsors who, due to their generous support of the show, help bring this to you each and every time we bring you the show. From Eamon Ambrose, author of the best-selling sci-fi serial 0 Hour, comes a new novelette, Love and Other Algorithms. When Frank, a personal robot assistant, meets a similar model named Shelley, they are inexplicably linked and form an instant bond. But when outside forces conspire to separate them, Frank must decide how far he will go to save their relationship. However, all is not as it seems, and as Frank searches for Shelley, he learns that they are both part of something much, much bigger. Out now from Amazon, Love and Other Algorithms by Eamon Ambrose. Hey authors, are you looking for a beautiful professional cover for your science fiction or fantasy book? Holly Heisey Designs offers custom illustration and cover design with characters that will put your people center stage, spaceships designed from the ground up and scenery that makes your world come alive. Visit Holly Heisey Design to book a custom cover or view pre-made ebook covers ready to purchase. Holly is an award-winning illustrator and designer who's done work for the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction, the Future Chronicles anthology series, and USA Today and Amazon.com best-selling authors. Holly will bring your story world to life and get you a cover that will help sell your book. Visit hollyheiseydesign.com for more information on how to book your custom cover design or purchase pre-mades, as well as join the Holly Heisey Design Facebook group for discounts and first dibs at all the new spaceship and fantasy pre-made covers. Find all of this at hollyheiseydesign.com. A Bright Shore, The Eden Chronicles, Book 1 by S.M. Anderson, a military sci-fi political thriller set just a short decade from now in 2031, holding to the concept of individual liberty can get you killed. Western civilization is in collapse, a process led and driven by the world's leading supposed democracies, our own included. What was once the Western world's guiding light of liberty is quickly being replaced by state-sponsored serfdom under the guise of a global economic reset done in the name of the workers. This is an exciting new novel by an exciting new talent, a debut novel, the first in a series from a former CIA operations officer who has decided that his lifelong writing habit, hobby, obsession is more fun than real work. Go pick up a copy today of A Bright Shore, The Eden Chronicles, Book 1 by S.M. Anderson. There's a link to all of our great sponsors in the show notes at hankgarner.com. Stick around at the end of our excellent interview today for an audiobook clip from Richard Gleaves, the Jason Crane series. As always, thanks for listening. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I am really excited to bring Jack Carr on the show. Jack and I have both almost reached optimum caffeination this morning, so I think we're going to have a great time. Jack has a brand new book called The Terminal List, and it releases this week when you're listening to this. And I was just telling Jack that I got a copy of the book a couple months ago, and it's probably one of the best, if not the best, debut thrillers that I've ever read. So I'm really excited to have you on the show. Jack, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Well, thank you. I begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or a storyteller?
Yeah, so I grew up. My mom was a librarian growing up, so we grew up just surrounded by books. So there's not a first memory. It's just all of my childhood was. I had that desire to write fiction one day, and two things. One, I wanted to be a Navy SEAL from a very early age, from age 7. So I do have a distinct memory of that. And we can talk about that if you'd like in a little bit. But around that same time, I also wanted to write fiction and just started reading at a very early age and really loved all those books by Nelson DeMille and David Morrell and Tom Clancy and J.C. Pollock in the 80s and early 90s. And then I discovered Stephen Hunter and Daniel Silva and guys like that. And then discovered Vince Flynn and Brad Thor. So, but in the military, I couldn't really think too much about my future as an author. I knew I wanted to do that one day, but when you're in the military, you really need to focus on the mission, because that's what you owe the guys under your command. That's what you owe their families. That's what you owe the country. So I didn't really think about that next stage until I got very close to getting out of the military and got to switch gears in my mind and then started writing.
Well, the rest of us really appreciate that single focus when you're in the military and not thinking about writing your the great American novel.
Right. Yeah, you have to be solely focused on the task at hand, particularly after September 11th. For sure.
I love the idea that you grew up in essence in a library, there with your mom, and you kind of can't help but let that infect you a little bit. I'm kind of obsessed with Ray Bradbury, and I've been digging through a lot of his old stuff lately, and really in the writing of his book Fahrenheit 451, and he tells this great story about that he was renting a typewriter in the basement of a library of a college library, and that when he was writing the story, it was like a dime a half hour to rent the typewriter. And he would run upstairs and go grab books and smell them and just kind of get that visceral, book experience, and then run back down and write the next scene in Fahrenheit. And I just got that idea of, if a kid kind of grew up in a library, that it would just kind of infect you that way.
I think so. I think it is infectious, and my mom made sure we were read to every night as kids growing up. And then when we could do it ourselves, we always had that reading time. And in the summer, we go up to a cabin up in the mountains in Northern California, and we always had a couple hours in the day that was set aside for reading. So, and I loved that time. I'd sit in a hammock and just read for hours. So I grew up with a love of reading and a love of books, and knew I wanted to go down that path one day.
You talked about that you love these kind of military thrillers and political military thrillers. Which came first for you? Because you said that your other desire was to be a Navy SEAL. Do you think that your love of those kinds of books informed that, or do you think that your desire to be a SEAL informed the kinds of stories that you gravitated toward?
Right. So there's definitely overlap there. And the specific instance I remember when I wanted to be a SEAL, well, I'll go back a little bit. I always knew, even before age 7, that I was going to serve my country in the military. Just didn't know exactly in what capacity yet. And the reason for that is that my grandfather was a Marine in World War II, and he flew the Corsair, which was that blue plane that had the gull wings.
Oh, yeah.
For people that remember the TV show Black Sheep Squadron, or Baba Black Sheep, with Robert Conrad back in the late 70s. It's that plane, the gull wings that flew off aircraft carriers. So he was a Marine pilot, and he was killed in May of 1945 when 2 kamikazes hit the Bunker Hill and almost sunk it. Took it out of the war. It limped its way back to the West Coast for repairs, but it never saw combat again. And I grew up with boxes of his medals, of the silk maps that they used to give aviators back then, because if they hit the water, they didn't want a paper map to just disintegrate in the water. So they had silk maps, old black and white photos of him and his squadron. So I really grew up with this appreciation and respect for the military and our country. And at age 7, I saw a movie called The Frogman. And it's an old black and white movie.
Yes.
It shows, and I didn't watch the whole thing. That was the funny part. So we had one TV, and my dad would allow me to switch the channel during football games for 2 minutes. So when it was a commercial, he'd look at his watch, and I'd run up to the TV and I'd flip the channel to a movie that was playing. And usually on the opposite of football game, back then in the late 70s, early 80s, they'd have some sort of a war movie, mostly a World War II movie, on the other channel. So I'd flip it, and he'd look at his watch, and tick, tick, tick. 2 minutes later, I'd have to run back up and flip it back to football. And one of those times, I saw that they had this black and white film called The Frogman, and I saw these guys swimming up over the beach and putting explosives on obstacles in advance of conventional force landings. And I thought that was pretty cool. And I asked my dad, hey, who are these guys? And he said, they're the Frogmen, because that was the name of the movie.
Right.
And I said, well, what are the Frogmen? And he said, ask your mother. And my mom, being a librarian at the time, said, let's go to the library. So we went down to the library and did a little research. And this is very early 80s, maybe 1980. And there was hardly any, maybe 1979. And we did a bunch of research at the library, and there was hardly anything written about seals back then. You could actually research all of it. There was a couple mentions in a couple magazine articles, and a couple mentions in a couple chapters in books, and it mostly focused on Vietnam, Korea, and World War II. But primarily at that time, what was out there was focused on Vietnam. And today, you couldn't possibly research everything there is to learn about SEALs online. But back then you could. And I walked away with, whether it's true or not, what I read was, hey, SEALs are the most elite fighting force in the world, and the training's the toughest ever devised by a modern military. So there, right at age 7, they had me. But once again, I was reading books, and I started to read more books that related to that topic, that had that military theme. And as I got older, those books, transitioned into more young adult fiction, and then more adult fiction, political military thrillers, and that's just what I gravitated towards.
Man, what an awesome story of the seeds being planted early. My grandfather and great uncles, I remember, talking about World War II, and there was these men of that generation seemed to just be magical beings that were bigger than life, and did things that were just incredible, and I think that generation of guys really inspired a lot of us. I think you and I are pretty close to the same age, and I feel like we're kind of missing some of those tales of valor, and that we're standing up for the right things and doing the right things around the world. And then some of those old great black and white movies. I kind of because we do have so many stories now of maybe intrigue, and maybe the world is not so black and white. And I'm so glad that I grew up in the generation where maybe I wasn't so jaded, at least younger.
Right. No, we definitely owe that generation a debt of gratitude. And I always think about, hey, are we doing them a disservice by what we're doing today? Do we really appreciate what they gave up for us, and then what they came back to, and what they did when they got back, and really build this country into the strongest country in the world, while keeping that link to our most basic freedoms. So it's a different world today, that's for sure. But I have nothing but gratitude and respect for those guys that gave it to us.
Absolutely. So you started reading thrillers as your desire to join this elite fighting force. What were some of those? You mentioned some of your favorite authors earlier, but what were some of those books that made a big impact on you?
Right. So Brotherhood of the Rose by David Morrell was one of the first works of fiction that mentioned SEALs. And it's in one sentence. And I think the year was either 1983 or 84. But so he wrote a series of books, Brotherhood of the Rose, Fraternity of the Stone, League of Night and Fog. And I just devoured those books. And of course, David Morrell created the character Rambo with First Blood. And and interestingly enough, I reached out to him randomly as I started down this path, but as we got closer to publishing, so this last fall, and he got right back to me. I couldn't believe it.
How cool.
Yeah, it was amazing. So I'm corresponding with one of my childhood heroes, essentially, and he couldn't have been nicer. So and everybody in this industry has been so nice to me. People that and I thought, coming from, I came from a very competitive background. So I thought this is going to be a competitive industry, in that people in their same genre will look at you as competition. And that is not the case at all. I have not experienced one iota of that. Everyone has been so welcoming and so helpful and so kind that it's astounding and refreshing, and I absolutely love this industry.
The jerks are really the exception.
Interesting. Yeah, I didn't. I had no idea. Obviously, with being solely focused on the military for 20 years and then making this jump, you really don't know what to expect. But it wasn't what I thought. So it's great to be here and to now have friends that I've looked up to for years through their writing. So Brotherhood of the Rose, Fraternity of the Stone, League of Night and Fog. I loved those. The Nelson DeMille books. Every time one of those came out, Charm School, one of my favorites. I'm sure you and your listeners have read that.
Oh, yeah.
But one of the greatest, great classic in this genre. But devoured everything by Nelson DeMille. J.C. Pollock, who I think it's a pen name, but he wrote books back in the 80s that I loved, and just devoured those kind of novels.
That's awesome. So you when did you join the military, and what was your journey into that, and tell us about when you came out and then decided that you were going to write the book. So you had a desire to for a long time, but you did your military service and then came out. So when did you go in? What did you do? Where did you serve? And then tell us about coming out.
Yeah, so I came in 96 and retired in 2016. So did 20 years, and I came in enlisted. I had my college degree already, but I wanted to come in enlisted because, once again, popular culture influence. I remember, and you probably remember too, all those Vietnam movies. They always showed that brand new officer showing up with his shiny rank on his collar, with the nice haircut and the shave, showing up in Vietnam. These guys that had, been in the jungles and been fighting for months on end, knew the enemy, and this guy comes in and says, "Oh, you got to shave, you got to get a haircut, we have to have some military bearing," and then he gets everybody killed.
Right.
So because of that popular culture, and then after Richard Marcinko started writing the Road Warrior series, he was a prior enlisted guy from Vietnam, later became an officer. So I think that really influenced me as well. But I came in enlisted, and I wanted to do that because I wanted to essentially start in the mailroom and work my way up. I wanted to establish a reputation. I wanted to learn the trade, and I wanted to be a sniper. And typically, officers aren't snipers. So all those things. So I came in enlisted, went to boot camp, in A school, and right into BUDS, which is our SEAL program. And I was there for those that watch any of the show channels on shows on SEAL training. But I came out of that, went to my first SEAL team, and then it was off to the races. And my second platoon was when September 11th happened. So that really changed everything for everybody as far as focus. And
yeah, I was going to ask you, when you went in, the world was a very different place than it is now. What was that? I know as a civilian, what it was like to watch the world change around you. What was that like for you on the inside? And, I'm sure knowing way more than we knew. And, what was going through you guys' head at that time?
Yeah, so you kind of got swept up in the wave, and not just those of us on the battlefield, but our families as well. Got swept up in this wave that was way different than anything. The paradigm shifted on September 11th, and it changed the course of our country's history and the history of the world for that matter. But before September 11th, essentially, you showed a SEAL team, and we all thought that we were going to start doing secret missions right away because that's what we'd seen in a couple movies, that's what we'd read in a couple books, and we thought we were going to just zip off and do some secret missions and come back and go to the bar and have a beer. And that wasn't how it was before September 11th. When it was a team and you're a guy, and a brand new guy in every organization has to earn it. In the military, you typically earn that by things up, painting walls, changing light bulbs, that sort of thing. While at the same time, you're learning the trade from the guys that have been there and done that, and was lucky a few guys from the Vietnam era still around, not very many, but a couple, and they'd pared down over the years. So we were really still using Vietnam tactics, and we were still living off the reputation the guys had earned for us in the jungles of Vietnam, which was quite a watershed moment for special operations. But second platoon, we were overseas already. September 11th happened, and we were in this barracks and middle of the night overseas, phones start ringing up and down the hall, and we didn't have TVs in our room, so we didn't, so we couldn't watch. So we all got up, woke everyone up, went down to the basement of this barracks, and we watched the Twin Towers all on TV. And no one was really prepared for that senior leadership levels. You said that we were more informed than the average, and I don't think that's really the case. I mean, we were prepared as much as we could be to go into battle and go into combat, but the learning was definitely steep. And a few days later, off to the Middle East, and then it was bouncing back and forth between there for the next 16 plus years.
Wow. You served in Afghanistan and Iraq also.
Yep, correct. Most of my time was in Iraq, Afghanistan, southern Philippines, northern Arabian Gulf, some other places around the world as well. But primarily Iraq, I would say. That's where I really, cut my teeth in this profession, and was feel honored to have done so.
What was the job that you guys were doing? Can you talk about it now?
Sure. We've all seen it on TV. Essentially, you're trying to pressure that enemy threat network over there. So you're trying to develop intel sources, and then you're trying to go off and not necessarily cut off the head of the snake, although you can do that too, but impact the battlefield, take out IED cells, because IEDs and EFPs were a tactical weapon, had strategic implications for us. Remember those years from about 2005. Up to now, it really became one of strategic importance, and I mentioned that in the book, and get into a little bit of that in the terminal list near the end, if you remember that part of the book. But those emotions that the protagonist James Reese feels in the terminal list, those are things that I felt at some point over these last 20 years. So I took those emotions, you could tell there were some emotions surrounding the IDs and EFPs, and took those and twisted those into a fictional narrative and applied them to James Reese in the terminal list. But 20 year run, and as I got closer to the end, I moved up rank. I became an officer somewhere there, and as I got to the closer to the end of my 20 years, I finished up my time as a tactical battlefield commander, and you do that around the 04 level, which in the Marines or the Army or the Air Force would be a major, and in the Navy that's a lieutenant commander. So got up to that point and did my last deployment to Iraq as a task unit commander at that lieutenant commander level. And the future after that is more, you have leadership roles, but you're not leading troops in the front anymore. You're not taking guys into battle like on a horse at the front of the cavalry. That's not how things work today. The leaders are back in tactical operation centers behind computer screens these days. So my last deployment was the last one where I'd actually tactically maneuver guys on the battlefield, and that's what I came in to do, was to lead guys in combat. So when I got back from that, I took that breath and realized that it's time to now get out and take care of my family. So we have 3 kids and my wife, and she's put up with a lot over the years, me disappearing for 7 months on end, and just in the workups for those deployments, you're gone for 2 weeks here, there, a week there, another month there. So you're just getting ready to go overseas, and training is inherently dangerous in and of itself. So I'm very fortunate that she's so strong and was took care of the family in my absence. So when I got back from that last deployment, it was time to take a breath, and that's when I shifted gears and started looking towards the future.
The families of our deployed soldiers, airmen, and sailors, they are the real unsung heroes. They are. I can't imagine what families go through, and the strength and the courage of them has to be applauded.
Oh, without a doubt. As a member of any member of the military, really, but my experience is more in the smaller unit, the SEAL teams, and you have a mission, and you're there with your guys. You have that sense of purpose that surrounds your profession and your mission. So you go down range with that. Meanwhile, you leave your families at home, and they're doing the diaper changing. They're taking the kids to soccer. They're the ones paying the bills. They're the ones dealing with the leak in the roof. They're all of that, and you are in hand down range, and you have your friends to your right and left, your teammates to your right and left, and you have that sense of purpose, which is why a lot of guys have trouble transitioning from that, because once you've been in that high stress environment where you're depending on your teammates for really your life and for mission success, it's hard to leave that behind and make a transition to the private sector. For me, I had that purpose, that next mission in life, which was writing, and we have a middle child who has severe special needs, and that really made the decision to get out as well, to take care of him, because he needs a lifetime of full-time care. So really, I had that sense of purpose as I transitioned, but most guys don't have that, and they end up searching for it for a while. And they can't let the military time go.
I can just imagine. And your protagonist in the terminal list, SEAL Commander James Reese, has a really interesting transition. I'm going to let you talk about that in just a minute. But one thing I've really wanted to ask you is, since 9/11, there have been a bunch of kind of post 9/11 military political thrillers that have cropped up, that, tell some of these stories. As a SEAL and as someone that, is interested in these stories and also, now a published author in this genre, did you read any of those that have come up, in the last 15 years or so? And, what was your, not naming names, but, what was your opinion of how people were handling the genre? And, did you feel like, oh, when I get out, I can't wait to tell this story because people just are not getting it?
No, I never felt that that people weren't getting it. Sometimes you'd read something in one of the books that didn't make sense as far as a weapon and gear standpoint, like switching the safety off on your Glock or something like that. Which it didn't bother me too much, but it's like, oh, it's such a great read, and then they switch a safety off on a Glock, which doesn't have one. So there's things like that. But I'd sneak some fictional thrillers in, but for the most part, I was focused on a lot of nonfiction during that time. So I was studying where we were going. I was studying lessons learned from other people that had been there before. I was reading about the politics of where we were going, the religion of where we were going, the economy, the language, and how all those things shape the culture, just so I could make better informed decisions downrange under fire. So I really felt like I owed that to the guys. Owed that to the country to really study the enemy and study the areas in the world in which we were going. But I did sneak in a few political military thrillers along the way. I remember I read Term Limits by Vince Flynn on the way to Iraq, and I was just blown away by that book. And I was actually fortunate enough to meet Vince Flynn before he passed away at SHOT Show, which is an industry show where they have all the new weapons and gear and all that sort of thing in Vegas. And he was there, and I met him near the end of the show. So as everybody is filing out of the show, and it's a really big industry show there, we just started talking. And I didn't tell him I wanted to be an author one day, but I did ask him, hey, do you ever wake up and think that somebody with a background like mine might read the Term Limits and gets the idea that they might want to kind of follow that as a game plan? And he said, I'll never forget it. He said, every day. He thought about that. Yeah, but he, once again, that was probably the first guy that I met, part of this industry and genre. And he, once again, could not have been nicer and could not have been more generous with his time. So I've read all of his books, and now the new Kyle Mills continuing that series, and linked up with Kyle as well. And just what an amazing guy, an amazing series, and an amazing character, and Mitch Rapp and Scott Coleman. So and obviously having Scott Coleman as a former SEAL, that resonated with me as well. And Brad Thor's books, having Scott Harbath as a former Navy SEAL, and an earlier book by Tom Clancy that I read in college, Without Remorse. It's my favorite Tom Clancy book, probably because the character protagonist in that story is a former SEAL as well. So there's definitely some overlap in there.
Kyle Mills and Brad Thor are great friends of the show, and they're such awesome guys doing really great stuff in that space. Well, let's talk about the terminal list. So you get out, you're reacclimating to family life and your son, who you're dedicating a lot of time to. Where did the idea for this book come from, and kind of what was your impetus for sitting down to say, okay, I'm finally going to do this thing that I've dreamed about?
Yeah, so it sparked, I think in December of 2014, I started getting a few. I wasn't taking guys downrange anymore. I still had about a year and a half or so left in the military, and I started with, hey, it's time to shift gears here. And a lot of things that had happened over the last 20 years were the impetus for this book, and for the things that happened to the protagonist and happens to the protagonist in this book. So started there and came up with the idea. The title came right away. And I think the title sparked actually from a friend who, I don't know if he's joking or not, but has a list out there. If you ever get some sort of a terminal illness, there's some people on there that you might want to take care of. And so I think the title sparked from that. And I hope he's joking. But I took that, and the title really informed the story from there. And I knew I wanted it to be a hard-hitting thriller that focused on revenge without constraint. So that was and I think I got from one of the Stephen Pressfield books. So I'm sure you've read the Warrior Ethos and The War of Art and The Authentic Swing and Turning Pro and Do the Work, but all talk about slaying resistance. And I think in one of those, he talks about having a theme for a book and how he wrote it down on a yellow sticky and would put it there next to his, I think in his case, typewriter while he was writing. So I wrote revenge on a yellow sticky and I put it on my computer and started writing. I started with an outline, and as I wrote, I filled in that outline to just make it more clear to me visually. And by the time I got to about the halfway point, then I discarded the outline completely and just continued writing.
Yeah, I love that. I think a lot of authors use a similar plan like that, where you start kind of working out the story beats, or at least these are things that need to happen in the story, and then get really familiar in your mind, and then just let the kind of the magic of writing take over.
That's exactly it.
Yeah, I love that. So tell us about this character, Navy SEAL Commander James Reese. We've mentioned him a couple of times. What was your what was your motivation for this character, and how early in the dreaming of the story did James come about?
Yeah, so he was there right from the beginning. And, his background is fairly similar to mine. He's a prior enlisted SEAL that becomes an officer, and he's thinking about getting out. So he is finishing up his time as a tactical battlefield leader, and he's thinking about getting out and moving on and taking care of his family. He has a young daughter, and he's been at war for quite some time, and it's just time for him to make that transition. So he's on his last deployment to Afghanistan when disaster strikes. And it's one of those things that is not quite right going in, but you can't pinpoint what's wrong with it. And his entire element, his what we call a troop in the teams, is ambushed. And it's a very well orchestrated ambush that leaves all but him and one other guy dead. And from there, things start to happen and unfold that make him suspicious as to how they were led into this ambush. And when he gets home, he loses his family in a home invasion even before he gets to the front door. So those things kind of send him on this journey and send him on this mission of vengeance. And I go back to the Japanese code of honor called Bushido, where samurai would go into battle thinking they were already dead, and that made them more effective and efficient warriors. And I applied that to James Reese through a pharmaceutical tie-in and testing of a drug on our nation's most elite soldiers that is part of this conspiracy. So he now goes into battle thinking that he's already dead against the people that wronged his family and his troop, and starts working his way up his list, using his training, using his experience, and using what he learned about the enemy overseas. So essentially, he becomes an insurgent on home soil. So all the things he was fighting against overseas, he takes those, becomes the insurgent as he works his way up his list, putting everybody that wronged him, his family, and his country and troop in the ground.
Jack, one thing that makes thrillers so fun to read is that when done well, they are real page turners. And, some books you want to kind of stew on, maybe read a page, let it soak in, think about the story, then move on to the next thing. This book is not that book. This book is, from the opening scene, you kind of have a knot in your stomach. Like, all hell is kind of gonna break loose, and that things are not right. But when done well, you want to take that thriller and then reread it and look for all the pieces that you missed, and so, is this, and can I figure out, now that I know how it's going to end, let me go back and look for all the details. And this book was absolutely like that for me. Like, I couldn't stop reading. I wanted to keep, oh God, what's going to happen now? And you have this feeling of dread. But it's a good dread that, as a first novel, were there any things that you used, or did it just kind of come instinctively to you, kind of how to shape the story and how to keep that adrenaline ramped up for the reader?
Yeah, not in particular. It was just start writing and go and take everybody on a ride, but also have moments of introspection so that the reader can really get a feeling for how somebody that has been downrange and been in similar situations feels. So taking those emotions and applying them to this fictional character ended up being very therapeutic to write. So I think that has really resonated with readers, and I think it resonated with Emily Bessler at Emily Bessler Books, and I think that's why she felt a kind of a kinship towards it and felt so passionate about it, and why we have the the book deal. But there are books out there that I've read multiple times in this genre. Brotherhood of the Rose back in the 80s was one of those books. I've read Term Limits a few times, and Stephen Hunter's Point of Impact. I love Stephen Hunter. Love his books. Love the Bob Lee Swagger story. Love the Earl Swagger story. And Point of Impact, his first novel that introduces Bob Lee Swagger to the world, is a classic piece of writing in this genre. And once again, Stephen Hunter's one of those guys that I got connected with here over the last few months, and once again, could not have been nicer. And he's in the middle of writing another book, and he took the time to read this one and write a blurb for it and give me words of encouragement, and that really meant a lot to me. Everybody that's written a blurb and has taken the time to read this book in the genre, because I know how busy they are writing their own things, for them to do that has really meant a lot to me.
You really can't understate or overstate the need that if you want to write in a particular genre, you really need to immerse yourself in that and learn the tools and learn what it means to be in that genre. And then if you immerse yourself enough in it, you kind of learn the language, don't you? And the writing becomes kind of second nature.
I think so, and mine wasn't necessarily as logical as that, because I just grew up in it. I grew up with these books, and it was just a part of me. Just like wanting to be in special operations and be a SEAL was a part of me from a very early age. So was writing and reading these kind of books. It was just a part of who I am. So it made for a very natural transition. And I think essentially the past 40 some years of my life have prepared me to write these kind of novels.
And I think that's really where it needs to come from, is from the love of it, because I think you can approach it in a workman type fashion if there's something you want to learn more about and you start studying it and learning it. But when you come to it from a love of it, it's really kind of ingrained in who you are.
I think so, and I think that that really comes across in the pages of this novel with people that I've talked to. It's just, I love the genre. I love to write. I love this story. I love the theme of this book, and it ended up being a very personal project. It wasn't something that was disconnected from me. It wasn't something I had to research. It was just a part of me, and I think that probably comes across in the pages of the book.
Well, at the heart of all great political military thrillers is a good conspiracy. Where did the idea for this conspiracy come from? And was there any special research for it, or kind of how did you tackle that part of the story?
Right, you're absolutely correct. There's all the books I loved growing up and all the movies I loved to watch growing up all had that one, the revenge theme, but also had that conspiracy. Yeah. So those two were tied together. And so in thinking through what the conspiracy would be, I know I needed my protagonist to think that he was already dead in order to be as effective as I wanted him to be. I didn't want him to have a future, and much like the Japanese samurai. So how do you do that? So I started with that question, and I've done a little research and reading over the years on some of the things that happened in the Church hearings in the late 70s when the CIA was taken to task for some of the things that they'd done and some of the testing that they had done on humans. There were some things that the Nazis had done in World War II that were brought up, and there were also the Stanford prison experiment. Probably people are most familiar with that back in the early 70s, I think, where they made guards and they made prisoners and they videotaped what happened. I think there's a movie made of that recently, actually. So because of all those things together, which culminated at the Church hearings in the late 70s, what came out of that was this, I think it's called an institutional review board, where anything that was going to involve testing on humans would have to go to this board. And essentially it was a check on government power and a protection for people that signed up to be part of these, and some of them that didn't sign up to be part of these things. Think of the dive tables. For anybody out there that's a diver, those dive tables came from somewhere very early on, and those were from Navy guys getting put to depth and brought up and seeing the symptoms that they had. So there's it goes all the way back to that. So soldiers, university students, prisoners, in mental institutions. So they've all been tested over the years and all sorts of things. And it came to an end in the late 70s. So I decided, hey, what if somebody didn't get that memo? What if enough time passed where somebody decided that there was a financial reward if they could come up with some sort of a pharmaceutical product that could make them a lot of money. But they needed to test it first, and first on animals and then on humans. And who's the test bed, and how does this tie in to the military? Well, that's how James Reese enters the story when his troop is the unwitting test subjects in this experiment. So that's where that comes in.
As readers, why do you think we're so kind of turned on by the idea of these grand conspiracies and, that there are shadowy forces, within government and that are, doing things that the rest of us don't know about? Why do you think that resonates so deeply with us as readers? Because I know it does me, because we read books because we love to, is stuff like that really going on?
Sure. You get, I think we get hints of it maybe from time to time. It's been so ingrained through popular culture, but that is because probably throughout history there have been conspiracies at all levels in government, in private sector, in combinations of two. So when we get a hint that there might be something out there, we have this essentially in our DNA, just like we have this affiliation with stories of revenge, and those things were told around the campfire, and they've been part of essentially popular culture since the beginning of time. So the conspiracy tie-in, and now with a government that is so big and with so many hints of conspiracies and so many factual examples of conspiracies that have happened over the years, it shouldn't be a surprise that I think that there are conspiracies not behind the curtain, but they're out there.
As the farther we get away from 9/11 and people tend to be jaded, and the longer we have forces in other countries, and the longer things drag on, people tend to get really tired, and then start to question everything. And do you feel like that telling stories where we show that there are good guys and that they are overcoming the forces that would have the world embroiled in stuff, do you feel like these kinds of stories are important for the general public at large?
I do. They're an escape. So these type of books are escape for people. And if it's a fun, thrilling read, you keep them coming back for more. But it's also, you have it for. So I wanted to have, as growing up, it seemed that the heroes that I gravitated towards were popular fiction heroes. And so that James Reese didn't wake up one morning and just decide to come up with a list in that position. So that Reluctant Ernie, and obviously those have had us from the beginning of time, from the pre-Odyssey days, and from that whole storytelling over time, passed down from generation to generation. We've had this theme of the Reluctant Ernie, and that's more.
You have on your website, which is officialjackcarr.com. I saw it earlier, and I tried to pull it up just a second in time. You posted a letter that you had to submit your book to the DoD for their approval, and it's really kind of funny because it's got a couple of redacted places there, and it said that they approved the book with these changes, which
right.
I kind of laughed at. What was that like? And of course, you can't tell us what they wanted you to change, but that's kind of hilarious that you had to do that.
Yeah, so it's a work of fiction, obviously, but if you read the regulation conservatively, if I wrote a cookbook that had nothing to do with the military at all, I should admit it to the Department of Defense for review. They have an obligation and a review for so I wanted to honor my former security clearances and do it right. So even though this is a work of fiction, I wanted to make sure, because I'm not the arbiter of what's classified and what is in the military. It was such a big part of my life for 2 years. There is a connected that in the book. So I submitted, and much to my surprise, they took and it's one of those that's it was surprising to me how it was really they're part of the national score. So again, hey, that's even those with those actual those or try to them or go get like Jack. So there are blacked out portions of the book, and it's I thought people could figure out what's behind those black lines. I didn't want to submit it again and have to wait another 60 days for them to review it as well. So decided to keep them in there and then post the letter on the website that showed that it was reviewed and approved as amended.
That's so cool. And I would recommend everybody to go to your website. You've got a great section on there with, you call it guns and gear, where you kind of break down, some of the thinking behind, why you chose certain things. And, it's a really fun read. And, if you're an author and you're looking to get some details right, this would be a great place to start, especially if you're an author who's ever, written, that your protagonist clicked the safety off of his Glock. This but fun stuff. But you also have an article in there where you go through the cover journey on there, and a lot of people may not really get the psychology of how a book cover comes together, and you've got some iterations of it there that was really fun to look to see how the journey of how the cover came to be what it is.
Oh, great. Yeah, it was fun. It was fun to be part of that journey and see that first cover and just loving that first one so much that's up on the website. But then sleeping on it a little bit, taking a deep breath, and it's and wondering, hey, is this thing look a little too 50 Shades of Grey?
I laughed out loud when I read that. I was like, oh yeah, I see that now. Exactly. Yeah, that could have been bad.
But then I remembered how many copies 50 Shades of Grey sold, and I was like, well, maybe we should keep it.
Well, maybe we should. Yeah, but. Yeah, then you're going to have to write that second, 50 Shades book, and things get squirrely after
tough,
that.
Yeah, that might be tough.
Yeah, you don't want to do
really
that.
Follow up with the theme of the book.
Right. Oh man. Well, the new book is called The Terminal List. Jack Carr, this is your debut book. This is an amazing, amazing book. I cannot recommend it enough. I'm going to send everybody to pick up a copy of it. It releases, this Tuesday. And, Jack, I wish you much success on your journey. If there are other people out there that maybe are thinking about writing their first book, or maybe in the process somewhere, because this is so fresh and raw for you right now, is there any advice that you would give them?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I first talked to Brad Thor, he passed this advice on to me, and it was very, very liberating, very freeing. And I'll forever be thankful to him for passing this along to me. But he said he gave me two pieces of advice, and he said, hey, give yourself permission to write a bad chapter. And just hearing that from him, from someone who writes such amazing books and who's been so successful and was being so kind and generous to me, it was just, I can't really describe the feeling, but it was just so liberating. It freed me up to just write. And to, not wait for everything to be perfect, not wait for the stars to align, not wait for perfect silence in the house and everything to be arranged just right, and to be feeling right and to be in the zone and all of that. It was just, hey, give yourself permission to write a bad chapter. And just hearing that just freed me up to go forward. The other piece of advice he gave me, he said, hey, the only difference between a published author and an unpublished author is that the published author never quit. And that really harken back to my days in Buds and SEAL training, where we have that bell that is right there in front of the first phase office, and it follows you around during Hell Week for those that are familiar with that. And we put it on a trailer hitch in a truck. So the whole time in Hell Week, when you're awake for that entire week and you're cold, you're tired, you're hungry, then you can see that bell, and you know that all you have to do is go up and ring that bell, and you're going to be warm again. You're going to get some hot chocolate, some coffee, a donut, and you don't have to feel this way ever again. So hearing that from Brad, that was just, it really connected me to my time in the teams, to my time in SEAL training, to just life in general. You just never, ever quit.
That's good stuff. Jack Carr, we're going to send everybody to pick up a copy of the new book. Thank you so much for taking time to come on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here, and hope we can do it again sometime.
Thanks for listening to the Author Stories podcast. For more great author interviews like this one, go to hankgarner.com and dig through the archives. There's something there I know you'll love. Now stay tuned for a special audio clip from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
They sat in silence, leaning on Spook Rock. It pulsed against his back, in rhythm with his heart. He fought an urge to press his palms to it and steal its mysteries. Kate took her hand away. This fundraiser for my father's campaign, was it your idea? No, I didn't think so. You need to watch out. For what? She stood and paced, hands in pockets, avoiding his eyes. Right now, you're a free agent. Nobody knows what you can do except me and Joey. That's rare. You've got space to find your own path, without everybody watching you or controlling you. How many of them, us, are there? A few handfuls of families. We used to be all over, but we're kind of dying out. The secrecy issue makes it hard for us to find each other, hard to find people to marry and the like. So we congregate in a few obvious places. Salem, Sleepy Hollow. Transylvania? Don't be stupid. There's no monsters, just people. And ghosts. Ghosts are people. They were. She held her arms out. That's all there is. People in the spirit world. And places in between. Magic places, haunted places. Like this. We gravitate to towns where we can stick together. It sounds nice. It can be smothering. We have factions. Not all of us want to get by in peace. Some of us, my father is one, say we need to be more aggressive. Increase our numbers. Take charge of things. Politics, finance. Fix the world. People listen. They think they're special. They don't call themselves the gifted. They call themselves the appointed. As if God singled them out to rule. My dad's a good man. He just thinks he knows what's best for everybody. And you'll be meeting his crowd. At the fundraiser. It will be mixed, mostly normals, but I'll point out the dangerous ones. My father employs a man named Mather. You can't miss him. He has purple eyes. Mather is like this rock. He'll be able to sense you. If you want to stay a free agent, you'll need to avoid him. Or else what? They'll want to recruit me? You're Ichabod's descendant. Ichabod was attacked and survived, a potential founder. They're already watching you. I'm no good to anyone. You don't believe that. Neither do I. She knelt and pushed the hair out of his eyes. What am I going to do with you, Jason Crane? Love me, he thought. He felt himself lean forward. They would kiss, here in this sacred place, beneath the stars. Stars? Stars? What time is it? Jason jumped to his feet. We need to go. Why? A firefly swept the air, flared yellow-green, and died. What's wrong? She followed his gaze and gasped. Fireflies swam in every dark crevasse. Faces coalesced where the lights hovered. Faces of crones and young boys and stern men. Emaciated, hale, wounded, vacant, menacing, piteous. Bodies took form. Military uniforms, bonnets, black lace, crepe, shrouds, winding sheets. Sleepy Hollow Cemetery had disgorged its dead, and that grand army of spirits now made camp at Spook Rock to await orders from their leader. A laugh chopped the wood of the forest. Jason had heard that laugh before. He squeezed Kate's hand. Run,